On today's episode, a Bassmaster great retires, yet another fishing company is bought, and we dive into the world of fish displacement after flooding events, reducing line issues on spinning reels, and choosing a travel rod. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk Podcast. As always, we are brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. And right now, you can head over to the website. They are not playing around. They released their Black Friday sales a few weeks early this year. And if you go over to the website, just click the banner at the top of the homepage that says Black Friday, and you're going to see a long list of deals that are going to be hard to pass up. They've got, right now on the website, 25% off all Dobbins rods, 25% off all used gear, 40% off all Berkeley gear, 20% off all Beast Coast, 30% off all Sunline, 20% off Bates reels, 25% off of all Yamamoto, 25% off Phoenix rods, 30% on all Fenwick rods, 35% off G. Loomis ice rods, $100 off Megabass Orochi XX rods, 20% gift card rebates on Powerhouse Lithium, and so much more over on the website at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. It is the best time of the year to restock on your favorites because right now the sales are too good to pass up. American Legacy Fishing showing you those firsthand. Again, you can go over to www.americanlegacyfishing.com, and if what you're looking for is not on sale, you can use code TACKLETALK10. That's going to save you 10% on almost everything else on the website that's not already on sale or not one of the small number of exclusions. Again, www.americanlegacyfishing.com. And as always, use code TACKLETALK10. All right, everybody, let's jump into some news here today. The very first thing we've got to do is we've got some catching up to do because the past 2 weeks, we've had two great guest episodes, which are always a ton of fun. Side note, our full video interview with Mark Zona is live over on our YouTube now. This is one of those episodes that even if you listened to it when it came out, watching it is definitely worth it. Just the visuals alone make it worth watching that conversation versus just listening to it. So that is available now over on our YouTube channel. I edited the whole thing. It looks really good. If you want to go watch that, please head over and check that out. Last week, we had on Drew Gregory. Again, a great episode. Shout out to Drew. So two great episodes back to back, two very long episodes, but now we're back to your regularly scheduled programming here, which means after 2 weeks of guest episodes, we are behind a little bit on the news, which we are going to fix right now. So first off, Major League Fishing is still having their team series events as we speak. So a quick correction, I guess I should probably say before we get into this week's tournament, is in the organized chaos of the show planning on the past few weeks, I completely left out 1/3 of the teams that were competing in the last MLF team series when we introduced that a few weeks ago, including the team that ended up winning the whole darn thing. I just completely forgot to say that they were competing in that event. So sorry about that. That one's on me. But your final results from the last General Tire Team Series event down in Texas came to a close on October 29th. Your winners were on a team made up of Jeff Sprague and Brian Thrift. Both alums of the Tackle Talk podcast, both great guys. Fun fact, Jeff Sprague was probably, I think he was, our first pro that we ever had on the show like 4 or 5 years ago. And then Brian Thrift, we actually had on last year on Tackle Talk. So a huge shout out to Team Coin, as they were called. It was Brian Thrift, Jeff Sprague, who took home the win at the last General Tire Team Series event for Major League Fishing. Now, on to the current Team Series event that's going on as we speak. The true final Major League Fishing high-level-ish tournament of the year featuring BPT guys that you can watch in 2024 is the Summit Cup, and it is taking place right now, November 17th through 22nd, down in Florida. So your 12 teams, and I'm going to try and make sure I get them all this time, in this event, your first team is Zach Burge and Mark Rose. Then you've got Matt Becker and Spencer Sheffield. You've got Nick Hatfield and Takahiro Amori. You've got Drew Gill and Marshall Robinson. You got Marty Robinson and Jonathan Van Dam, Brandon Coulter and John Hunter. Then you have Bradley Roy teaming up with Jason Vance. You've got Britt Myers with Terry Scroggins. You've got John Murray with Skeet Reese. You've got Adrian Avina with Josh Bertrand, Bobby Lane and Chris Lane. And then you've got Stephen Browning and Cliff Crochet. So as always, you can watch this event for free if you want to head over to MajorLeagueFishing.com to keep up with everything at the Summit Cup if you are still looking to get your fix for competitive fishing here in 2024. All right, next up on the show here today, we have a surprising retirement on the Bassmaster side of things as one of the greats decides to hang up his hat from the Bassmaster Elite Series, and that gentleman is none other than Clark Wendlandt. So Clark took to Instagram on November 5th, I believe it was, where he posted a video that caught a lot of people off guard. So I'll go ahead and drop that right here so you guys can hear it straight from Clark himself.
Hey, I wanted to update y'all on my plans for the coming year for 2025. And I'm going to do something that's been a real difficult thing. Thinking about it, mulling it over, but I'm going to retire. I'm going to retire from the elites. I'm going to retire from pro bass fishing. And, I'm still going to have a social media presence. I've had opportunity to coach quite a few kids and older folks that love to learn how to fish. And I'm still going to do that, put a little bit more time towards that. I've got grandkids and I'm looking forward to spending time with them. I'm still going to fish a lot and hunt a lot and spend time working at our ranch. And I want to say a few thank yous. First of all, my wife, Patty, because literally it's been my dream to do this, not necessarily hers. And it's been an amazing career. And I want to thank her because she's made it fun. We traveled with the kids and it's been incredible. Our kids got an amazing education because of her, and I had a wonderful person to be able to hang out with and spend time with and experience it all with. And I would tell people today, if you're going to get into pro bass fishing, learn the history of professional bass fishing. Because what we need today is respect for why we're out there, respect for doing this for a living. Why are we even able to do it? Because Ray Scott and the fishermen from the past paved the way so that we could come forward and do it. And so I think we owe them a lot. And if you don't even know who they are or don't know about them or don't know about the struggles, then, I think you're going to have a hard time making this a true career. A good friend of mine, Rob Newell, gave me a great compliment yesterday when I told him I was retiring. I've done this for 33 years. And he told me that I had grit and grind. And I always wanted to do it the right way. I wanted to work harder than everybody else. And because even if I wasn't the most talented, if I put in the most effort, that's really all I could do. That's really all I could ask. And so that's what I've done. This career's been a blessing to me. Thanks everybody that's been a part of it. And I'll still be around a good bit.
So that's straight from Clark. Truly one of the best anglers that we've seen over the past few decades. A 3-time FLW Angler of the Year, a 2020 Bassmaster Elite Series Angler of the Year, a very consistent angler through his entire career, and somebody that we're going to miss watching on the Elite Series moving forward. Now, if you want to know why he's calling it quits right now, Dave Mercer just put up a great episode with Clark talking about his retirement, obviously. And from that interview, there is one big reason that Clark decided to retire right now, and it is those 3 letters that we're all tired of hearing about by now, FFS. forward-facing sonar. And by now, if you're a loyal Tackle Talk listener, you know my stance on this whole thing. Basically, you can think what you want. I don't care. I know you don't care what I think. We're not debating that here. We're going to leave that to everybody else on social media and YouTube and podcasts and comment sections and message boards and articles. That's not us. That's not who we are here. That's not who we've ever been here. So we've done a pretty good job, hopefully, over the past few years of avoiding it completely and instead focusing on more productive topics and subjects and things, hopefully, to help you become a better angler. But Clark didn't mince words in that podcast with Dave Mercer. And I watched the whole interview, but if you want to know in a nutshell Clark's thoughts and maybe one of the big reasons why he's retiring right now, I will insert a clip directly from his episode with Dave Mercer right here.
Forward facing is not the way I think the sport should go. And so can I compete at that level? Yeah, I think I can. 2 years ago, I made the Classic. 4 years ago, I won AOY. I've done plenty good with forward facing. I just don't like it. It doesn't feel like the way tournament bass fishing should be to me. So, and I've got my reasons and everybody else has got their reasons, pro or con, either way. But I don't have to do it anymore. And it's not as fun. It's not the mystery that I believe it should be. The greatest anglers are the greatest anglers because they could go break down a lake in no time and they didn't need any equipment to tell them where the fish were. They just went out there and intuitively figured it out. The Rick Flunns, the Kevin Van Dams. Now, all of those guys used the electronics as time went on, but they didn't have to have them. And that's the way I think we should, the top level of bass fishing should be. So I don't have to compete against that anymore. And so I'm not going to.
So there you go, right? Straight from him. We're covering it because it's news. We're not covering it because it's a topic that I want to debate with anybody, because unfortunately, forward-facing sonar has become like sports or politics or anything else at this point. You're either on one side or the other, and no one wants to have their minds changed. There is this line in the sand for most people, and it's almost become like a tribal debate. You are either side A or side B. There is no in between. There is no room for any sort of like common sense conversation here. It is just, I love it or I hate it, and here's why. So again, for the 10,000th time here on Tackle Talk, you can think what you want. Both sides have their merit, but regardless of how you feel about it, it does kind of suck when you start to have some of the greats decide to hang it up a little earlier than you wish they would, and Clark is definitely one of those. So we wish Clark all the best in his retirement, as unfortunately another one of the greats calls it a career, and a legendary one at that.
Breaking news!
Uh-oh. Breaking news here, I guess. And by breaking news, I mean news that's like a week or two old, but we had guest episodes the past few weeks, so bear with me here. We're going to pretend like this is breaking news. Stop me if you've heard this before. Pull over if you are driving. If you're standing, sit down, because a big fishing company just bought a littler fishing company. Yes. Shocker. We only see this like 4 or 5 times a day now, it seems like. Truly an extremely rare and monumental moment here, the seismic shifts of which will likely be felt for millennia. Another fishing company got acquired. And this time, it's Northland Tackle. And the buyer is, you guessed it, GSM Outdoors. The rapid acquisition of brands by GSM continues as Northland Tackle joins the list of Dobbins and RoboWorm most recently, but also Big Bite Baits, Buckeye Lures, The Frog Factory, Phoenix Rods, Yamamoto, and more now under the GSM family of brands there. And honestly, I just don't have it in me right now to do the whole song and dance. And, here's the quote from Northland, who assured customers that nothing would be changing and it's going to be a good thing for them because now they have marketing power behind their products more than they had before. We'll keep an eye on it and see if the quality of the products changes moving forward, but hopefully nothing changes. It's the same darn thing every week at this point. So I will spare you the spiel here, but yes, Northland Tackle, who, by the way, bought Bagley back in 2020, is now owned by the almighty GSM Outdoors. And I will see you all here same time next week when GSM probably buys Nichols Nichols lures or X-Zone lures or something like that, and we will do the exact same thing again in a week or two. All right, enough news here. It has been far too long since we have done one of these. Let's spend the majority of today's episode hitting a wide variety of fishing topics and techniques as we crack open the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Mailbag, powered by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Adventure awaits at dakotalithium.com.
All right, the first question here is from Josh, and he says, Andrew, I've been a fan of the show since the beginning. Thank you for all the countless knowledge, encouragement, and mostly a wonderful weekly escape. My question is, do you have a certain day you have set aside for tackle organization? Myself, I use Black Friday morning to organize and restring my equipment, thus then knowing what I might need to refill in hopes of catching a sale. Sent from the back of the boat, Josh. Oh, buddy, you are giving me way too much credit with this question. If you're organizing and taking stock of your gear at least once a year on Black Friday, then you're already light years ahead of me. I am notoriously the most unorganized angler that I know, bar none. I wish you could see right beside me right now on the floor. I brought in one of my tackle boxes to dry because I got rained on the other day, so it's sitting right beside me on the floor here in my studio, which, by the way, is just a fancy word for spare bedroom. But if you want an accurate description of what it looks like beside me on the floor, if you've ever seen one of those pictures where someone catches like a huge root ball or a log or a snag of fishing line at like a spillway, and there's 100 different lures in a big tangled ball, that's what this tackle box looks like beside me on the floor. It looks like if you blindfolded somebody, they walked into American Legacy Fishing, they picked 53 random things off the shelf, opened them up, put them in a blender, and then poured them into a 3600 tackle tray. That's what it looks like right beside me on the floor right now. It's ridiculous. I am just incapable of keeping my tackle organized. And I could theoretically even organize it before I hit the water next time, but when I come back, it will look like this again. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It will be an absolute pile of chaos because I switch lures so often in the kayak and I'm doing a lot of things really fast and on the fly, and I convince myself internally that I don't have time to put things back. I have time to get things out, which is great, but I don't have time to put them back in the right place when I'm done with them. So they just go in this big pile, and this pile is what ends up being my tackle box and my lures, where like I look through it, I find the thing I want, I have to shake it out, because it's tangled in like 10,000 other lures, and you're sitting there shaking it, hoping you don't hook your fingers while you're trying to get this lure out. That is me. That is unfortunately how my tackle is organized. I wish it wasn't so. I get really jealous when I talk to guys that are super organized, like when we had, Brian Thrift on, I think last year. Speaking of Brian, obviously he won a couple weeks ago, and we talked about that at the top of the show. But when we had Brian Thrift on the show, I was asking him about his organization because he is notoriously one of the most organized anglers on any sort of pro circuit. I mean, he is like OCD about this stuff. So I really envy those guys. I wish I could be more organized. I'm just not. I'm a complete train wreck off and on the water, and I just don't see that changing anytime soon, unfortunately. So to your point though, when do I realize when I need to order something or I'm low on a certain color or something like that? I realize it when I'm out on the water and I can't find what I want to use. And I think to myself, wow, this situation would be perfect for lure X. And then I look for lure X in my big pile of lures and I can't find or don't have lure X. So unfortunately, as organized and as detailed and as perfectionist of a person as I am, tackle organization is my one true downfall. I'm so jealous again of all of those guys that have like, you go out with your buddies and they have these really nice multiple boxes organized perfectly with all the different colors and sizes and things like that. And then I'm over here trying to figure out if the spool of fluoro I have in my hand is, 16 or 18 because I ripped off the label on the spool to cover my backing knot on my spinning rod or something. So that's me, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't so, but it is. So I don't really have a good answer for you, unfortunately, except I'm envious of you. Organizing right before Black Friday sounds like a great idea. It sounds like a pretty efficient way to do things. Obviously, you take stock of everything that you have, things that you might need, and it is the best time to go out and restock and buy new gear. Obviously, we talked about it at the top of the show. American Legacy Fishing running awesome sales right now. So yes, if you need to buy gear, this is the time to do it. Obviously, makes sense to take stock of your gear before Black Friday. That's great advice for anybody listening to this show, and advice that I probably should take myself. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first, we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. And the past couple trips I've taken on the river, I promise you, I could not have done without my Dakota Lithiums. I have been working those poor Dakota Lithiums to the bone in super heavy current, trying to find these fall fish that have really kind of just gone all over the place on us around here. And that means fighting heavy current, which means using your motor, laying on your motor all day long, 10 plus hours straight. And I love that I never have to worry about my battery. It's the one thing when I'm out on the water, I can just plug in and totally forget about, because Dakota Lithiums never let me down. They're twice the power of traditional batteries at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster, last up to 4 times longer. They have 100% US-based customer service, and they come with a whopping 11-year warranty. And all of that, plus we're going to save you some money on your next battery. That's because you can go to www.dakotalithium.com and use code TACKLETALK5. Tackle Talk, the number 5, saves you 5% off your entire battery purchase. It saves you money. It lets them know that we sent you. It's a win-win for everybody. Don't trust your precious time out there on the water to just anyone. Trust the best with Dakota Lithium. www.dakotalithium.com, code TACKLETALK5, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. All right, the next question here is from Jake, and he says, love the podcast, keep up the great work. My question is about flood events. I know we've talked about seasonal flooding in creeks in the past, but this one's slightly different. My favorite 2 ponds back up to each other, and the levee of a creek is on one side. To my knowledge, in the past 20 years that I've been fishing, the creek has not breached the levee and flooded the ponds, although I assume it has in the past because there are river fish like gar, drum, and Asian carp in these parks and rec ponds. This past weekend, the creek came way up, and both ponds and the creek connected and came up at least 15 feet higher than normal. I know you get a lot of flooding up by you. Do you think these ponds are still the same fisheries they were pre-flood, or is it more or less a reset? I need them to be fine because I caught my number 1 and number 2 PBs at 6.25 and 5.7 pounds from each of these ponds, and for where I'm at in Missouri, those are studs. Keep up the great work and appreciate the quality content, man. That's a good question. Okay, so I like stuff like this because in my head, I can picture 2 or 3 situations around here that almost set up the exact same way. There's one in particular that almost sounds like you're describing a place that's like an hour and a half away from my house. I know it's not because you're in Missouri, obviously, but when I was reading this question, there is a spot. Now, it's a little bit of a drive, but it is semi around me that I know fairly well that sounds a lot like this situation. So I think I've got somewhat of an answer here for you. So the big question, obviously, when a normally isolated pond floods by a creek or a river or another body of water that now connects to it, what happens? Well, in my experience, it seems like you have a better chance of getting new fish in than you do losing the current fish that you have in those ponds out. At least I think so. So what I can give you to hopefully back this up is a little bit of factual information from some of my past catches at the place that I'm thinking of that sets up very similar to this. So there is a very, very, very small lake, more like a giant pond that, again, is about an hour and a half away from my house. And that big pond or little lake or whatever you want to call it has a creek that runs right beside it. You might call it a small river. It's somewhere in between. Small river, big creek, but it runs almost right directly by this place. And a few times a year, that creek floods into that big pond to the point where the pond probably, doubles or triples in size. It's kind of like on a floodplain down there. And there's no longer this barrier between the creek and the pond. They just merge and kind of become one for almost like 2-3 weeks sometimes until that flooding really subsides, and it really does just kind of ruin this place for quite a while. Well, I know for a fact that most of the big fish in that big pond stay in that pond during those floods. They don't leave, they don't follow the current, they stay in that pond. And the reason that I know this is because I've caught the same fish multiple times over the years after multiple giant flooding events. I have photos of probably 4 or 5 fish that I've caught before and after the big floods, multiple years apart, probably from 2.5 pounds up to like 6 pounds. And they stayed in that pond the entire time and they never left. And I think it's probably just in their nature, similar to kind of how river smallmouth don't really get washed downstream from massive floods. I think pond or lake largemouth are kind of the same way if for some reason there is some sort of flood and now it connects to a new body of water. Yes, you might have 1 or 2 of them that might escape and might get out of there during that flood event, but the majority of those fish just seem to have that kind of hunker down and wait it out mentality to any sort of massive flood. So bottom line there is I don't think you're losing a lot of fish from those floods. So I guess that's a good news if you have that pond you're talking about where it had some big fish in it for your area. I don't think they all just like ran out and escaped and it's this giant reset. I think you're probably okay. They probably just found someplace, hunkered down, waited it out. Now, the opposite can be true too, though. You can gain fish from a flood depending on what type of fish are in the creek or river that floods into that pond. And I know that because in this same exact pond, there are now smallmouth in it when there didn't used to be. You know where those smallmouth came from? They obviously came from the creek and the river when those flooding events happened. So they just kind of wandered in there. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because if you're a river smallmouth, like I said, the one thing you're trying to do is get away from that super fast current in those floods. You're trying to find a safe place to hunker down and wait it out. And if you just happen to be like kind of right by that pond and now it opens up a little bit, you follow that calmer water to where you think the bank is. Well, it's not the bank anymore. Right now it's spilling into this pond. So you got into this sort of slack water to wait it out. The water levels go down and now you are trapped in this pond. So that kind of makes sense a little bit to me too. But bottom line here, I don't think you have to worry about losing your good fish in that pond from a flood when it starts to connect to other bodies of water. You just might have a couple new visitors in there, which you've already seen firsthand with the gar and the drum and things like that. All right, the next question here is from Hunter, and he says, "Hi, Andrew. I just finished the episode with Drew Gregory, and it was a great episode, very informative. Toward the end, you guys were talking about flukes, and you mentioned there were 5 to 6 ways to fish them that were all really good. This is less of a question and more of a suggestion if you're open to it, but I would love to hear an episode on different ways to fish flukes, how to rig them, the different retrieves, etc. I know I could probably look that up on YouTube, but there's a reason that this show is my first stop for learning anything about bass fishing. Anyways, love the show. Thanks, Hunter." Hey, Hunter, great suggestion. Definitely something that we should probably do down the road. To my knowledge, I don't think we've ever done more of like a fluke-centered episode. At this point, with like 5 years, it's kind of getting hard to keep track of what we have and haven't done. But yeah, I don't think we've ever done a full-on fluke episode. So I'll do some digging on that one, right? I might find someone to come on for that. That might be a lot of fun. Or I might just do it solo here and get some input from some of the guys around here that have really been tearing them up on flukes. So I'll put together something there. It might take a little bit of planning, but definitely probably a fluke episode on the horizon. I think it's a pretty good one because just off the top of my head, right, there's like a dozen different ways that you can rig a fluke, and then there's probably a handful, 3, 4, 5 of them that are pretty darn sneaky that I don't think a lot of guys are doing, that a couple people around here got me hip to not too long ago. So yeah, I think there's enough content there for sure that we can talk about it in a full episode. Good call. Fluke episode probably coming at you sometime soon. The next question is from Chase, and he says, "Hey, Andrew, been listening for a few years now, and I still get excited every week when I see a new episode drop. I've grown up fishing, just tagging along with friends and family, but I've really gotten obsessed with it over the past 5 years. In high school, I was gifted a baitcaster combo, and with that, made the jump from the old Zebco to a proper fishing setup. Since I started on a baitcaster, I've never been comfortable with a spinning rod. Every time I use spinning gear, in about 15 to 30 minutes, I wind up with a massive bird's nest or some massive line twist issue. My question is, do you have any tips for keeping your line from twisting up on spinning gear? Thanks for your hard work, Chase." Hey, Chase, thanks for writing in. I'll be honest, that's a little bit of an odd one, right? Because I feel like usually the normal thing that someone would probably write in and say is, hey, I've been using spinning rods my whole life. I made the switch over to a bait caster. I keep bird nesting. What am I doing wrong? This one's interesting because it's the exact opposite. You got used to a bait caster, which is great, but now the spinning reel is kind of the issue. And you're 100% right. You can end up with twists and wind knots and little bird nests and stuff on spinning gear too. And there's a few things you can do to stop it. Yes, there are the old kind of tips like, take your spool off and hold it under hot water to help with the memory of that line and stuff like that. But I think it really comes down to two key tips that'll probably help you out. The first, I would use braid. And you didn't say in this question what kind of line you're using, so you might already be doing that. If you are, you can skip this tip. But if you're not, if you're running mono or you're running fluoro, especially on that spinning reel, I would switch over to braid. And I think most people listening to this will probably agree to. You're just going to get more line twists, more wind knots with mono and fluoro than you will with braid on a spinning rod. So that's an easy fix. Braid is way more manageable. It's way more forgiving, not to mention that it's way more sensitive too, but that's a whole different thing. And it will just make your life a whole lot easier on a spinning reel. Now, the other thing that you want to do with a spinning reel is maintain tension when you're reeling that line in. One of the biggest issues for line twist and knots and bird nests and things on a spinning reel is reeling in on completely slack line. Don't do that, right? That's going to be a recipe for issues. You want to make sure you have at least a little tension on that line at all times when you're reeling in. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be pulling your lure super hard or burning it in or anything like that, but just make sure your line is at least taut enough that it's not bowed out to Timbuktu when you start reeling it in and your line's all loosey-goosey all the way up and down your rod to the reel. That's where problems seem to start. So it's really, really simple there, but just make sure, pull your rod tip up a little bit so that the tension of where the line is touching the water and the tip of your rod at least straighten that line out a little bit before you start reeling, things like that. That'll help you. You just need a little bit of tension. You want that line to go back on your reel nice and tight. You don't want it to have these little loose spots in it because that's where you start to get those wind knots, which you don't want. So yeah, really simple there. Maintain tension when you're reeling. Look into running braid versus straight mono or straight fluoro. Two things that I think will probably help you out. All right, the next question here is from Rick, and he says, "Hi, Andrew. Not a question, but instead, thank you for your review on the Newport NK180 kayak motor. It really hit home for me as I bought one in July of 2023, along with a Dakota Lithium 24-volt 56 amp-hour battery for my new Canoe Unlimited. Highlights for me are the durability of the motor and the prop. They've taken a licking and keep on ticking. My biggest disappointment by far is the battery indicator on the throttle control. It's so completely inaccurate that I'm just shocked that Newport sold it to the public like this. A replacement control box delivered the same abysmal performance. I bought a Victron Smart Shunt IP65 battery monitor so that I would have some information to work with on the remaining battery level. Thanks again for the great information on topics that are relevant to your audience, Rick." Hey, Rick, I'm glad you enjoyed the NK180 review. I tried to be as honest as possible about what we liked and what we didn't like about that motor. And one of the things I was really disappointed with, if you go back and listen to it, obviously was the battery indicator that you mentioned. We talked about that in the episode. It's just very... I guess to use your word, inaccurate, right? I mean, last Friday, I did 14 miles on the river, half of which I was going upstream in current so fast that I would put the throttle on full 100% go mode and barely move in that current. I ran that battery so hard for 10 straight hours, and within the first hour of being on the water, it was reading that I had 2 out of 5 battery bars left after I had freshly charged that battery, which was so far from the truth. I had not only 5 bars, but quite possibly multiple days of 5 bars at that point, and it was still reading 40%. So again, that's not the battery issue. My battery is completely fine. My battery was going to last me days. It's the Newport throttle and its battery indicator that's the problem, to your point. So yeah, unfortunately, that's one of those things I wish Newport would have fixed. I mean, there's other brands out there like Torqeedo that do remaining battery and remaining miles and stuff stuff way better than Newport does. So the technology is out there. It's not a matter of if you can do it. It's a matter of why didn't they do it, I guess. I don't know. I don't understand all that stuff. Probably way easier for me to sit here and complain about it than it is for, them to actually engineer products and stuff. So I get that. I'm kind of armchair quarterback right now, and I'm just sitting here complaining. But I wish they would have fixed that. Now, to your point, though, you can do other things to make sure that you have an accurate reading of your battery. You can buy some sort of battery level indicator or Bluetooth monitor to hook up to your battery. And you mentioned the Smart Shunt, I think it was the IP65. Those are really cool, but I think they're like $100. So cool, yes. Worth it, I guess it depends on if you want the peace of mind of knowing exactly how much battery you have left at all times. If I was newer and didn't know my exact battery well enough, then yeah, that might be something that I would invest in. Again, a little bit frustrating for the fact that I shouldn't have to pay $100 for a battery monitor. The throttle and the reader should just be right on the Newport, but it's not. So yeah, I guess you're left with a couple options here. You can either get real familiar with your battery and know how much just kind of instinctually you have left, or you can buy something like the monitor that you bought and hook it up to your battery and just have peace of mind at all times. If I didn't know my battery so much, yes, that's probably something that you should invest in. That's a good call. All right, the next question is from Gabe, and he says, "Hey, Andrew, I hope you're doing well. I'm a relatively new angler and have been listening to the podcast since I started about 6 months ago. So thanks for all of your help and awesome tips. I really enjoyed one of your recent episodes about finally planning that fishing trip, and coincidentally, I had some buddies message me a few weeks later about going on one. We plan on backpacking while still being able to fish, and this is where I'm looking for some guidance. I'm not sure where to even start regarding gear and tackle. I assume I need something that I can take apart that's relatively lightweight, but will still enable me to catch some pretty big fish. Anyways, sorry for the yap sesh, and I appreciate you taking the time to read this. Thanks for everything you do. Sincerely, Gabe." Well, man, that sounds like fun. I'm definitely a little jealous there. Backpacking trip with fishing sounds awesome. So you're probably looking, I would guess, for some sort of travel rod that breaks down preferably into like 3 pieces or more. And the one that comes to mind to me is the Lose Traveler 3-piece spinning rod set for $99. And I got to play with this rod down at iCast this last year. It's the only reason I even know what this rod is, but it was surprisingly nice for a 3-piece travel rod in that sub $100 price range. Now, I know I got pretty limited experience with it, obviously just kind of playing with it at iCast, but my initial impression was a good one. It has 3 pieces to it. It's got cork handles. It comes in a 6.6 medium fast. I think they also had a medium light and a light option too. It came with a carrying case. It seemed pretty darn solid, so I might take a look at those if you're looking for a travel rod. And then I would maybe just pack like a spinning reel or 2, some extra line, and then the essential baits. If you're backpacking, you don't want to get carried away with the baits. That's the one thing that could get real heavy real quick. So nothing exotic here. I would probably just pack the essentials. I don't know where you're going. I don't know what time of year you're going, all that, so I don't really know what to suggest, but I'd probably narrow it down to like maybe 5 or 10 techniques and just really focus on keeping those stocked for your backpacking trip. But best of luck. Hope it goes well. Send me some pictures if you catch anything cool. And then the last question here is from Bruce, and he says, "Love the podcast, been a fan for 3 years now. Please settle an internal debate with me. I fish mainly kayak. I'm trying to keep it to 3 to 5 combos max, and right now I own a medium light spinning rod, a cheap medium heavy quantum combo, and a Dobbins 733C with a Shimano SLX. I want to get a treble hook rod for jerkbaits and topwater. I've always considered my Dobbins the workhorse, jig, Texas rig, and spinnerbait single hook rod, but the more research I do, the more I realize how easily I can max out that 733C using anything over 3/8 of an ounce. So I either buy a dedicated medium fast for trebles and not care too much about maxing out my Dobbins on jigs, or I could use the 733C for treble baits and buy a workhorse rod. What would you suggest? Thanks, and tight lines, Bruce." Bruce, I will settle this internal debate pretty fast here. If it were me, I would make that 733C my jerkbait and my topwater rod, and I would buy a new workhorse rod that's probably 1 power heavier. So if you like those Dobyns rods, I would go with a 734C for my workhorse rod. Now, they make that rod in the Fury line. They make that rod in the Champ XP line. I think they might even make it in the new Maverick line. The 734C, I think, is the most versatile rod that I've ever owned, and that's saying something. I think if you're looking for a rod that can handle jigs, Texas rigs, spinner baits, chatter baits, buzz baits, that rod can do it all. And then I would use that 733C for jerk baits, top waters, and lighter applications like maybe shaky heads, wacky rigs, stuff like that if you want to throw those on a bait caster. I mean, you can actually even throw like square bills and stuff on that 733 if you wanted to. But that would be me. My only hang up with that 733 would be length. And I know some guys like me like a shorter rod for jerk baits and top waters, but I like a shorter rod mainly because I'm a shorter guy. So I like something in the 6'10" to 7 foot range. That seems to work well for me for jerk baits and top waters, just because it's usually a situation where I'm pointing that rod tip down, I'm working those baits, and since I'm a shorter guy, a 7.3 tends to kind of hit the ground or hit the boat or the side of the kayak a little bit more than I'd like it to. But if you're not 5'9" like me, or you don't mind just keeping that rod tip just a little bit higher so you don't smack the ground, a 733C is totally fine for jerk baits, top waters, things like that. So that'd be my suggestion. I think you'd probably be better suited by getting a 1 power heavier rod and using that for your all-around rod. Use that 733C for your treble baits. Hope that helps. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. Appreciate you all. As always, find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe if you can, leave us a review if you can, find us on the web, tackletalkpodcast.com, shoot me an email, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.